Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 438 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is compete every day. Our quote of the day comes to us from Michael Jordan. You have competition every day because you set such high standards for yourself that you have to go out every day and live up to that. If you are looking to make 2024 a great year, we would love it if you took a look at our Clear Planner. Think calendar, planner, journal, and goal and habit tracker all in one. Head on over to theclearplanner.com and pick up one for yourself. Our guest today is back for his second appearance on our show. Jake Thompson absolutely crushes it, and I suggest you grab something to take notes with. I know you will enjoy today's episode. Jake, I'd like to welcome you back for the second time to the No Quit Living podcast.
Dude, it's great to be here. It's great to see your face again. I see you on social media a lot, but this is always a little bit better because it's live.
I could not agree more. And we were just talking offline. You were guest or episode 264, which is crazy to think that that was back in 2020. And we are now literally days away from ending 23 and heading into 24. So it definitely, the idea of time does fly, so I appreciate you jumping back here. And the first question I ask every guest is, are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
All day, every day. Let's go. Let's go.
I think it's a little bit cheesy when podcast hosts read somebody's bio and it's like 5 paragraphs long. So I'm going to ask you really quick just to share with our listeners who didn't listen to 264. And if you didn't, when you're done listening to this one, you have to go back. But if you could just briefly tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you're doing today.
Yeah, and probably a lot's changed in that 3.5 years since then for both of us, right? So my name is Jake Thompson. I'm the Chief Encouragement Officer at a company called Compete Every Day. I spend my time as a keynote speaker working with organizations, talking about performance, right? How do we be more competitive with ourselves? And as leaders, step into that role and that opportunity. Have a couple of books out, blessed to be husband to an awesome wife, Elena, and I am a dog dad of 3 rescues. Donut, sugar, and snacks.
And I have to say, because I went back and listened to it, I could actually hear your dog's bark in 264 at some point. I could actually go, and it was funny. It was awesome. So you just actually teed up my first question in your intro, so kudos to you for that. But the idea and the term CEO, everybody obviously knows that as Chief Executive Officer, and I think everybody that's ever had any entrepreneur or business aspirations always wants to get to that level because you're, quote unquote, the top of the top. But you have a different title that I actually think every company should have 2 CEOs, both a Chief Executive Officer, but also your title. If you could kind of just give our listeners the story behind it, because I think it's awesome.
Yeah, so when I started Compete, I took on the title of Chief Encouragement Officer, mainly because I was looking for something that would stand out a little bit in conversations, would catch people's attention. Secondarily, I was inspired by the guys at Life is Good, the Jacobs brothers, Bert and John. Bert is the Chief Executive Optimist, and John is the COO, and I don't remember what the O stands for, but I was like, that's a really clever way to not only talk about your position, but what you do. I mean, the Life is Good guys, all about optimism, right? Life is good. And so for me, I've really embraced the idea of encouragement, which is simply to inspire someone else to have courage or to choose courage, which more than anything is like, when you're scared to death, just take action. Like, how do I help people do that? Because we're all afraid, right? We're afraid of failing, or more importantly, most of us, we're honest, we're more afraid of what other people will say about us if we fail, if we color outside if we step outside the box, anything like that. And so I really just embrace that, because when it comes to competition in sports and in life, courage is required. You can't always play it safe. You can't play it super, like you have to take risk. You have to put yourself out there. You have to push yourself beyond what's comfortable to improve. That all requires courage. And so that is kind of where the thing came from. And now it's just kind of me. I laugh, like people talk about, when we talk about it a lot, right? I have, don't confuse your identity of what you do with who you are. But this is one of those things where this is who I am, regardless of what work looks like for me. I will always embrace this idea of being an encourager. And so it's just natural to roll that into the work title.
I love that. And with both No Quit Living and the Positivity Tribe, our whole mantra is we rise by lifting others up. And I think not just during and post the pandemic, 5, 10, 20 years before, you can't ever encourage somebody enough. And I jokingly have put out some posts where, people say, oh, I have too much encouragement. Could you give it to someone else? It's always the opposite, where there's a time in someone's life, personally or professionally, where they look back and say, man, coulda, woulda, shoulda, if I just had some of that encouragement. You never know. They might not have given up, or they might have tried something way outside of their comfort zone because somebody gave them that extra encouragement.
So, dude, it's funny you say that. So one of the keynotes I did in November for a very large packaging organization, the guy that hired me used to live in Dallas. We used to work out at the same gym back in 2016, 17. I tore my Achilles back in 17 playing basketball because what else, right? Guy approaching 40s, you're going to tear your Achilles playing basketball. So I am going to the gym. I have a giant boot on. I'm frustrated because I can't do the workouts I want. I can't run, but I'm on the rower, one-legged row. I'm doing pull-ups, shoulders, all this stuff. And this guy was in the gym and he remembers watching me. And he remembers me still encouraging other people of like, hey, you got this, keep going. And hadn't talked to him in 5 years, 6 years. He reaches out a couple of months ago. Hey, we've got this event. My team gave me some speakers, but when I was thinking about like resilience and just having an encouraging attitude, I kept thinking about you working out. And so he's like, are you free these days? You want to come talk? And I was sitting there like afterwards, and I was talking to my wife and I was like, you never know who's watching. You never know what your actions and words are going to play. And that's a seed that was planted 5, 6 years ago. Like I never thought anything about it. I'm just showing up and saying, how can I help and add value to others? And then I had a chance to work with him. And so to that point for the listeners, like never underestimate your actions in the mundane, because a lot of times those are when the seeds are planted for the biggest harvest later.
That is, first of all, that's an awesome story, how it comes full circle, but not to negate that part of the story. But I think the other part which stands out to me is it's the little things that not you, but anybody does each and every day. We have no idea who's watching. And you may just think a listener that encouraging someone or saying hi or smiling might not be anything, but it could lead to a business opportunity for you. It could lead to something else for your wife, a spouse, a husband, a kid. And I think it's so cool because I know you enough that you didn't go to the gym with the boot on and be like, all right, I'm going to get a speaking event, so I can pay the bills and do this. You were doing it because A, you work out and that's part of who you are, but B, you didn't want to not go. So that's awesome. Leads me into my question that I have to touch on just because I think it's so important. The idea of compete. And I don't think I know for a fact I've never asked you this on the podcast or offline, and I don't think I've seen it on any of your social media stuff, but obviously No Quit Living, Team No Quit, that's kind of who I am and what we do. But where did this compete idea come from and what led you to really buy into it? Because I think it's an unbelievable, because you always position it as in sports and in life. And I think that's the best part, because a lot of times some of my stuff, people are like, well, what if you're not into sports? And I'm like, it's about not giving up in anything.
100%. Yeah. The actual definition of compete is to strive to gain or win something. Most people just focus on the win or assume it's sports. The real definition, if you look at it, strive. It's how do you wake up every day and strive toward greatness, your full potential, what you're capable of, what you want. And so with me, it was always sports growing up. I was a smaller kid in sports. I had to be the kid that was going to outwork you and out hustle you. So the quote, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard, was like me to a T. I was going to use it in sports and school and life. But what I found was most of my life growing up, it was me versus you. And that works for a while. It's good in limited senses, especially with mature mentality, which I didn't have. And so when I got out of that reign and out of that arena of sports, I really struggled mentally. I didn't have anybody where I was measuring myself up. And for a while, most of my self-worth was, am I better than you? Versus, am I the best version of me? And it wasn't until kind of years later, I was out of school, I was doing consulting, I was super unfulfilled with my work. I was probably 40, 50 pounds overweight, heavy, especially heavier than I'm now. And I just started thinking of like, how do you get out of autopilot, essentially, in life? I read Donald Miller's book, A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, and realized like I was living the crappiest story. Like my story sucked. I was not the guy you cheered for in the movies. I was not the guy that was helping anybody. I was like, how much money can I make? How many toys can I buy? And how many hot girls can I take out? Like that was the mentality. And I was like, I want to live a better story. I want to have a better life. I want to make a bigger impact. And so I started exploring this idea of what would it look like? And literally the original iteration of the brand was called Stacked, because it was like, if your health, faith, goals, relationships, career, if you went all in on everything instead of just going through the motions, if you started being intentional to improve in all of these areas, you would have a stacked life. Stacked didn't really fit, right? And so I kept toying with it. And at the time I started getting back into the shape, I was playing basketball at the gym. I started getting into CrossFit. And so the idea of every day, can I score more points today than I did yesterday or be better on defense? Can I beat the time I had in the gym on this workout last time? Can I really compete with myself? I started to embrace that. And every day was like, hey, how are we going to get better today? How do we be more intentional in these areas? And ultimately I was on a ski trip with a couple of buddies and just threw out the idea. I was like, hey, what about this compete every day? And to them, they were like, you're the most competitive person we know. Like, if we beat you in Madden, you want to play us 100 times to win. Like, you just want to win. And so the more I started talking about it, they were like, yes. Well, then I spent 6 to 8 months of like, I don't know what to do with this. I'm just going to tell everybody, like, this is what I'm doing. As I'm getting in better shape, as I'm figuring out what I want to do with my career, I was posting motivational messages every morning on Facebook. I was just trying to find ways to encourage folks, right? How do you start striving for better? And eventually my best friend, who was my roommate at the time, said, hey, listen, you've tried a bunch of stuff. It hadn't worked. What if you did t-shirts? Like those guys out of Life is Good out of Boston, they started selling out of a van. Why don't you start selling shirts? And so at that point, nothing else I'd tried worked. Put some money into a few boxes of t-shirts and tanks and started selling them out of the trunk of my car back in May of 2011.
That is so awesome to hear your story, because my hope is that somebody's listening and they too haven't figured out a name or an idea or a concept. And I think the idea of success leaves clues is so important, because I think so many people today look at social media, and you and I were talking about it before we jumped on here. And let's be real, everybody is posting their best information. No one takes 5 pictures and says, okay, which one of these is my absolute worst? Which one of these do I look terrible? And they say, hey, it's going to post, right? It's always down the road. And I think it's really important that you touch on that, because somebody's listening to this that isn't sure of themselves. Somebody's listening to this doesn't think it's going to work. But my hope is that, listening to your story and how you just spoke about your company and how it came, it wasn't, hey, on Monday, Chris, I decided to come up with this name, and then Tuesday, I made my first $1 million, and Wednesday, I sold the business for $10 billion. It's not that in any way, shape, or form. And anybody that puts that out there, I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but there's nobody that's created that overnight success just like that.
No, none whatsoever. And if you go back and listen to our first episode 3 years ago, our business and everything has changed dramatically since then. And that's just showing up every day and saying, what am I doing to get better and add more value? And that's the thing I tell anybody. Like, the one lesson I talk about a ton on stage is like, the thing I've learned more than anything in this journey that I wish I could have poured into my younger self is that you can chase ego or you can chase excellence, but you can't do both. Because if you care about looking good and winning approval, then you pose for the social media. You get caught up in the comparison game. You spend all your time, like I did, outspending your business to try to look bigger because you don't want to be the business owner selling t-shirts out of the trunk of your car, working your expo booth. Like you care about looks more than improvement. But when you really just say, what am I doing today to get better? How am I making my business better? How am I helping someone else get better? The focus goes away from, I don't care if people like me, applaud me. I just want to be great. And the coolest part about that I just pour into folks is like, listen, even if you suck at the beginning, we all suck at the beginning. Doesn't matter what we're doing. But if you stick with it over time and you go from crap to okay to good to great, and you sustain that greatness, because every day you're like, how do I get better? How do I get better? Eventually you get to a point where you succeed. And when you succeed, the one truth that always remains the same is everybody wants to buy you coffee. They want to pick your brain. They want to take you out to lunch because they want to know how you succeeded so they can too. They want that quick fix. And what they don't realize is it was years of just saying every day, what am I doing to improve versus how do I get people to like me and accept me? Or I'm worried about what they'll think if I fail. It's just, nope, blinders on. What am I doing to get better?
I could go into so many different directions, but if I had to say one thing from what you just shared and share with our listeners, it's consistency. Jake talked about showing up every day. What can I do better today? And I have to say to you, we've been friends for a while, and we know a bunch of similar people, and we've actually gone through some similar courses, which is really fun. But your new book, which I'm holding up, Lead Better Now, is awesome. I think you know because I shared that your first book was really good. I actually did I think like a 4 or 5 month book giveaway, and you were kind enough to send me a bunch, and I gave them out to people, and the feedback I got was awesome. Interesting question that I've actually been asked for a couple books that I've written that I don't really know. I don't think I did a good job answering, but who is this book for, or who did you write it for?
Yeah, so funny enough, this book is written for the person the book opens for, my wife. Even though I don't know if my wife is actually going to read it because she's married to me, right? But it was really like, my wife got thrown into leadership and was like drowning in the deep end because she was in real estate. Their industry was really busy. And so they were just focused on produce. And then when the market slowed, hey, you need to manage and lead. And she didn't have a clue. And just what we talked about, she was getting caught up of everybody else knows how to lead. They know how to manage. They know what to do. And I don't. I feel like I'm a failure. And I laughed. I'm like, what do you think I get on a plane every week to go speak? Like, nobody knows what they're doing. And so this book is very different in the first, in that this is very much for that person. I'm new to leadership. I'm new to management. I'm in it right now, and I want to be better at it, because it's all about, hey, effective ways of leading yourself, and then strategy on how to lead others, because we don't teach it. We just expect people to be good at it. And I think all the research shows it, because 87% of organizations surveyed say, yep, leadership development at all levels of our company is important, yet less than 5% actually do it. And of the ones that do, on average, they spend less than $5,000 a year on leadership development. So knowing that, like, you're not investing in it, the things you say it's important, it's no different than we do individually, right? I know I should be eating grilled chicken and broccoli and drinking more water, but man, these donuts and this beer taste really, really good on a consistent basis, right? It's that gap. And so for me, it's that person on their way up in their career, and they're just like, I'm not getting through to these people, or my boss and manager sucked. I don't want to be like them, but I don't know what to do. And so it's really designed to help them. And then my goal is, by the time I'm going to call it book 5, because 3 and 4 are going after a different audience. But by the time I roll out book 5 by the early 2026, that person is going to be moving up within their career and be able to really impact a culture, which is where that next book is for.
That is awesome. If I can give my 2 cents to your book.
Yeah, dude, you're like the 4th person who's read it. Like, cover to cover, you are the 4th person who has read it besides me.
Do I get like a monetary gift for that, or just the kudos?
Dude, I'll get you taken care of. Don't you worry.
No, so my 2 cents to add on to Jake's answer is, yes, he's 100% right what he just described for the end user, the reader. But I'm going to challenge and use your words, encourage our listeners that there is so much more than just somebody who's a leader and wanting to become a better leader in that book. You touch on so many different things in your own personal life, things that you've done, things that you've worked on. You talk about quite a bit your journey from where you are now to what it took to get there. And the reason I say that is it's not, to me, just a book for those leaders that are up and coming. Obviously, that's a huge component. But if you're looking for a book to read that's going to help you in different ways, even if you're not a leader, maybe you want to be a leader down the road, I would definitely recommend this book because it's something that you definitely can take things away from. And being a sports guy, I love how you put some sports stories in there as well. And you shared one about Kurt Warner. And I just think it was so important because it's not a huge part in any way, shape, or form about your book. But you talk about when Kurt Warner went from being in arena football then to stocking shelves at a grocery store. And for any of you that have seen the movie, I think it came out last Christmas. You talk about the book that he just wanted to be the absolute best at that, which I think literally goes hand in hand with what you said about competing and trying to be your best. So wanted to just pick your brain for a second on maybe that listener that is not in that ideal role and doesn't feel that, it's what they want to do. And maybe they're going through the motions. If you could maybe share something to encourage them, whatever they're doing right now, it's not the end goal, but whatever you're doing, be the best at it.
Yeah, it's the idea of how do you dominate the not now season? Ooh. How do you take ownership and own that not now or not yet season? It's Martin Luther King Jr. has a quote. I was pulling up real quick because I didn't want to butcher it, but it says, if a man is called to be a street sweeper, he should sweep streets even as Michelangelo painted, or Beethoven composed music, or Shakespeare wrote poetry. He should sweep streets so well that all the host of heaven and earth will pause to say, here lived a great street sweeper who did his job well. And I think goes back to some of the things you and I talk about of controlling your controllables, and effort is one of those. And in the world today, most people don't give it their best effort if they aren't motivated, don't want to do it, or don't like it. And the ones who do stand out. Maybe not in that moment, but in the long run, they do. And so when we talk about this not yet season, like the Kurt Warner story, it's how are you showing up every day with your effort and attitude to own that and do the absolute best as a way to A, stand out, and 2, model the behavior that you want others to do, right? We just talked about people are watching you whether you realize it or not. So it's so incredibly important. The other piece of it is the bamboo trees, right? And we've talked about in the book, and I know you've probably talked about, I have, right? 5 years, you don't see anything from a bamboo seed you planted, and then boom, overnight it shoots through the sky. Well, the only reason it's able to do that is because over the 5 years of, quote, seeing nothing, it's actually letting its roots and foundation go super deep into the ground to support its growth. And that's the most important thing. And I always remind myself of that because of the work I'm doing now. If I'd gotten the opportunities I have now 5 years ago, I would not have been ready for them. And I would have either done a poor job that would not have helped me grow or get to this point. It's like the quarterback who's thrown in, who doesn't prepare or isn't prepared, and they flounder, they lose all their confidence, their career's over, versus the one who maybe sits a couple of years, who learns, who picks it up, who builds their confidence. Then they start as a junior and they light it up. But they never would have done that if they were a freshman because they weren't ready and weren't trained. And so for all of us, we get such in a rush of, I've got to be there now. I got to be successful now. I've got to be a starter on day one. I step onto campus. I got to be corner office in my first or second year of a job. It's like, no, sometimes the best thing for you is to sharpen your skills in that not yet season so you can absolutely make a far greater impact when your opportunity shows up.
That we could just do the old mic drop right there. That was fascinating. And if you had been able to recite that quote word for word off the top of your head, I would return the money that you're sending me for being the fourth person that has read your book cover to cover. You touch on something that really hit me is you talk about you get to someone's head by going through their heart. If you could touch on that, because I think it sounds really cliche and Disney movie, but I think when you break it down, it's far from that. It's
funny you say that because the guys that repeated that to me are the furthest thing you would imagine from a Disney movie, right? The gruff sports coaches who you think are just going to scream and yell at guys. And some of those guys have screamed and yelled at me, but they poured into the relationship first. And so it's the idea that old school management, I see this with different industries I work with, of the old school traditional style of management is you're going to yell and you're going to berate and you're going to do it because I said so and da-da-da-da. And that has changed dramatically because people have way more options of where they can work now and what they can do. If you're going to be the person that always screams at everybody all the time and is always angry, I don't necessarily have to work for you because we have no relationship, no buy-in. I can go somewhere else. There's a zillion other opportunities. And so this idea of just making the investment like a bank account, little deposits into the person to show them, hey, I care more about you as an individual and your success than just seeing you as a number on a payroll. And so that idea of getting to people's heads, getting them to buy into the company, to the plan, to the direction, to what you're asking them to do starts with, do they even know if you care about them? Do they even know? Do you even know? And I ask people this at speaking events. Some of us have worked in the room with people for a year, 2 years, 5 years, and we couldn't tell you the other person's spouse or kid's name. That's a problem. That's great organizations. We say, hey, they're like family. And that's not always the case, right? Because we have to make hard decisions and cuts and things like that. But what we do know is in great organizations, we know each other on a more personal level. We understand and know some of their family, and we want the best for them. And it just goes above and beyond of just do as I say and let me yell at you all the time, because now people have way more opportunities to go anywhere else and work for people that actually care about them and want to see them succeed.
That reminds me of the quote, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that's been attributed to like 50 different people over time, but it's so true. It's true. And what you just said about corporate world overlaps into sports, into, charities, into boards where, people quote unquote work together, or they work on a board or a charity or foundation for years. And it's like, oh, Jake, like, are you married? Do you have kids? Like, are you 30? Are you sick? Like, I don't, and not that you need to be, and I always touch on this, and I'm sure you'll agree, you can't be best friends and know everything about everybody, because then if you are, then you're not doing your job. But there is, it's not this 0 to 100. It's like, okay, you can spend 5 minutes getting to know a coworker, somebody on your team, whether they're above you or below you. And to your point, the most successful companies are the ones that have a relationship, not best friends with everybody and know everything about every single person. But if you're working with somebody hand in hand, you should be able to develop that relationship other than just physically being an office away.
100%. There was a group I did some consulting with last year. And so I got to know a majority of their 100% team. Now, there were some people on the team I spent more time with because we're coaching. There were some people, you'd have a beer after work with. There were some people we just talked in the office, but what I did was find out about them. And so one of the guys, his daughter is a huge softball player in the state of Florida, and she's really good. She's a sophomore. So he spends a ton of his time going to softball games and talking about softball. And so on Monday mornings, like even just popping in, hey, how was the game this weekend? How'd she do? How are you feeling? What, like little questions that had nothing to do with work is like, hey, I'm knowing you. I'm paying attention to you. I care about you and your family. Like, just catch me up versus, hey, where's the TPS report? Where's my red stapler? Like, those little things. So I just think that's something that is that small choice that gives you a competitive advantage as a leader, getting people to buy into following you and cultivating that influence.
It's a swing line stapler. What was the character's name in that movie? Do you know?
Oh my gosh, I don't. I know it was filmed right here in Dallas.
Seriously?
Yeah, it's in so Las Colinas, which is in the Irving area by where the original Dallas Cowboy Texas Stadium was. That's where they filmed it, because the rush hour traffic that morning is on 635 in Dallas. And is the huge joke about, like, everybody knows Milton.
TPS reports. And it's funny, I'm just being a big movie guy. People always recite lines, and I don't know anybody who knows what a TPS report is, but just from that movie, it's like, a TPS report.
Yeah.
So in your book, you have a quote, and I wrote it down because I didn't want to butcher it, but it leads into my next question. There are 2.2 million podcasts out there, and only the top 7% publish an episode every week. So that's my entree into my next question. Jake has a podcast. I've been fortunate to be a guest back in, I believe, 2020 as well. But episode 740. So go back to the quote I just said. There's over 2.2 million. Only the top 7% of podcasts publish an episode every week. So please tell our listeners a little bit about your show, where they can find it, because I'm sure with what you've delivered tonight or today that they're definitely going to want to find out more about your podcast.
Dude, appreciate it. Yeah, man, it's consistency, right? It's just showing up a little bit every day. So that's what I try to do on the show. We have, you can find it on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, you name it, everywhere. It's called Compete Every Day. We drop 3 episodes a week. Mondays are typically leadership. So things you're going to find in this book, little tips, tricks for leading people, adding culture. Fridays, motivation. How do we give you a little quick hitters, just like Christopher does, short, probably 2 to 7 minutes, something to chew on as you're heading out the door. And then Wednesday is going to be a mix between leadership and guest interviews, kind of based on schedule. So what we really want to do is, hey, we want to equip you for ways to make an impact at work and make an impact in your life, whether that's your relationships and everything else. And so you can find that any iTunes, Spotify podcast player, and then our website, competeeveryday.com, will have links as well.
I love that. I asked you this question a little bit differently on the first episode. I've changed the questioning, and I know you know the famous Jim Rohn quote, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." I asked you last time if I could grant you dinner with one person, who would you pick? And you answered Jordan, and then you added Mark Cuban on as well. So tonight, I'm able to grant you dinner with any 5 people, dead or alive. You can't pick Mark Cuban or Michael Jordan. Which 5 do you pick?
Ooh, so I actually would not put them in my top 5 this time.
And not to cut you off for a second, but I love that because that just shows not only you, but how people change. And my list of 5 over the last 4 or 5 years, I think it's had like 112 different people, and some have come on and off. So I'm glad that you prefaced that so I can go back and edit it. So go ahead and answer it normally because they're not in.
So currently, Mike McDaniel, Miami Dolphins head coach, fascinated by his quirkiness, but also his backstory and what he learned when he got fired from the NFL. So he's a big one. Nick Saban, just because he is the GOAT and building cultures of excellence. I actually heard somebody mention that his talents were probably wasted in sports because he's the type of leader that should be running a country, which I found fascinating. So those are definitely 2. Trevor Mawad is one. Late great Trevor. Sports psychologist. I would actually really, really love to have a conversation with Dean Smith from Sustained Excellence, similar to Saban. I want to hear the different opinions on that. And then who would my 5th one be? Because there's a lot of people I really enjoy learning about.
Can I throw a curveball at you?
Yeah.
All right. Answer yours first. I'll throw mine after.
Annie Duke, author of Thinking in Bets. To sit at a table and listen to that dynamic of a conversation. And the people, to your point, the people would change. Like as I go through life, because I'm like, oh, that's fascinating. And I read a lot of historical, nonfiction. And so like there's different people throughout eras of like, ooh, that would be, how do you have those conversations? Like, tell me about that. Like I part of me would want to hear like the Apostle Paul of like, I want to see the pre and the post, right? His conversion, his change in life. So like there's so many different individuals, but that is also the beauty of books, right? We can't sit with them, but a lot of them we have a chance to learn and sit almost like a fly on the wall on different things. And so to you, props for continuing to put out great books. You said you're working on 5?
4.
4? I mean, dude, you're ahead of me. I'm chasing you down now. Who would be one person at your table?
I would love to have a conversation with David Goggins because I think he puts out some, I don't want to say controversial stuff. I think some of his stuff challenges people because it's right in your face, but he's gone on or off my table a few times. But I think the ability to do what he's done physically and mentally, because people I think miss that where they say, oh, he's nuts, physically he does it. You have to have both of them. So he's one that I would love to have a conversation with. And I think his 2 books are fascinating, and I always recommend them. And doing a lot of work with college athletes, I often get asked, Coach, what should I read for XYZ? And I literally could give them, a ton of books. But when it comes to motivation and inspiration, he's a guy that I think people can connect with, not from running a 240-mile race per se, but that perspective of you can go a little bit farther. And if this guy can run, an extra 50 miles when he's got a bunch of bones broken in his feet, you could probably, go another 2 minutes at practice. And he's definitely one that I would answer. The curveball I was going to throw at you, you actually, again, answered it. I was going to say if you had to have a woman, and you said Annie Duke, which was awesome, because I think for me, I got asked that maybe on a podcast like 2 years ago, and the guy took my question and he was going through it, and he's like, nope. He's like, now you got to add a woman. And I was just, it totally threw a curveball to me. So not only were you ready, but you knocked the cover off the curveball.
I was thinking through it as I was going through the list of like, who do I have? Because like, for instance, if you gave me a separate table and said, let's talk athletics. Like I just want to talk to competitors. I would have a mix, but I would want a Serena Williams. I'd want a Kobe. I would want Roger Bannister. I'd want Jim Thorpe. And then I would probably, I don't know who my 5th one would be, but I want some past and present, mainly for the different mentalities. Bannister was all about balance, doing something incredible, but balance. Serena and Kobe were extremes. And so now, especially, I would talk to them now, post-career, about how they're applying that competitive mentality in their pursuits. So like I would just want to rent out a mansion and have different rooms with tables of 5 and let me just pop in and out for conversations and a cigar.
If you need a busboy or waiter, I'm throwing my name in there.
Okay.
I want to just piggyback off something you said because it means a lot to me. I am and was a huge Jordan fan. That's why both my companies' colors are red, black, and white. And I think because Kobe in so many ways wanted to be like Jordan by the way he did things, I didn't like him, which is during when he was playing, which is now as I look back, it's just makes no sense. But the success he had on the court, winning 5 championships and literally tearing his Achilles, walking to the free throw line, making 2 free throws, walking out. There's been a bunch of guys that have torn Achilles and been carted off and in full on tears. So he was just at a different level. I would love to converse about some of the sports stuff, but more so what he was doing post his NBA career, winning an Oscar and just all these things that he did because he was a fanatic about, to your point, competing every single day. He never said, I want to be the best at everything. I want to, destroy Jake. And he always said, I want to be the best Kobe Bryant I could be. And everybody always said to him, do you want to be better than Jordan? And his response always was, I want to be the best Kobe Bryant I can be. Now, yes, if you asked him a follow-up question, would he rather have had 8 NBA championships or 5? He would have said 8, but he always talked about being the best version of himself. And I think it goes hand in hand with everything you talk about with compete every day.
So it's funny. I hated Kobe when he played. As a Mavs guy, like I would have loved him if he'd come to Dallas in that infamous almost trade, right? But I hated him because of his arrogance. He was such a cocky 18-year-old when he got out there, right? And like I remember cheering when he airballed against the Jazz. And
I did too.
But the funny thing is this. After his life, like I saw his post-career stuff and I would see bits and pieces and things he said. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Then I was like, you know what? I'm actually going to study this guy. So I read 3 Ring Circus, which is about their Lakers dynasty with Shaq. I read the book is somewhere, his high school book. I think it's called Rise, about his high school career. I've read Mamba Mentality. I've read a couple other ones. He has since become one of my favorite athletes. And the reason I tell people this is he is the perfect example that no matter how good you are, you can always decide to lead. Because he was a first part of his career, he wasn't the leader. He didn't want to practice with the guys. He didn't respect their work ethic. He didn't respect, like they had that feud. However, if you watched his career, like he's studying guys and teaching his team, he changed his role. But ultimately, more than that, I had a conversation with a guy who's friends with one of his high school teammates. And we got into this, and I actually am trying to figure out if there's a rabbit hole to run down. Jordan was the ultimate me versus you. Kobe was the ultimate me versus me. And there's a lot of crossover in the two of them. But you look at The Last Dance. Jordan manufactured stories, right, about guys that slighted him and crushed him. Like Jordan could dominate, kill you. To your point, Kobe's like, I'm being the best me. And Kobe had that switch on the court. He played Michael Myers. He was ready to kill you on the court. But otherwise, he's just like, what am I doing every day to make myself better? Jordan's like, hey, I'm going to take you on the golf course and get you drunk, and we're going to play 18 holes, and then I'm going to beat you later that night because I know you're worn out from the day. Like, I'm going to play all that. So, like, I'm still trying to see, like, what all is there. But that's why it is because his change from his first 6-7 years in the league to where he finished is one of the coolest arcs of a person's growth and development that finally understands I can't do it by myself, no matter how great I am. And I'm going to lead others. And Jordan had that too. And Jordan they built the team around it. But Kobe, because he got in so early and because he was, such almost a pariah for parts of his career early on, and then who he became as a leader, like one of the most beloved people of all time in the league by all the players talk to him. It's just fascinating hearing some of that now and a lot of those stories to where I've really come to appreciate, and like he's somebody like, man, I kind of wish I could go back and enjoy him as a fan instead of being like, God, Kobe Bryant again.
We have a bunch in common, and I've enjoyed this interview. No offense to the first one, probably more than the first one, just because we know each other better now. But what you just said about Kobe is literally what I've said, not only a little bit on this podcast, but on a bunch of others, in my admiration to him post his NBA and since he passed. But it was the same thing. He was arrogant. We're not that far apart in age. Actually, our birthdays are a couple days apart. And when he came out that first year, it was the same thing. I was like, oh, who is this guy? And then, he competed a little bit against Jordan, and I was like, all right, Jordan got the best of him early on. So it was like always like that. Jordan's still the GOAT. Kobe's, shoulda, coulda, woulda. We'll see. But it's who he was and how you describe the me versus you versus that me versus me. I think that is spot on. So wanted to ask you a question. Are there one or two people that you follow on social media that put out encouraging stuff and being the CEO of your company that maybe you would like to introduce or potentially reintroduce to our listeners?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I appreciate you asking. One of the guys I've gotten to know and enjoy following is my dude, Colin Henderson. Colin, mental performance coach, works with UCLA basketball, women's basketball. Actually just had a huge article about him in the paper, which is pretty awesome. Another really good person I enjoy following that we actually just connected and interviewed on our podcast is a girl named Kendall Robowski. She is a high rocks world champion. She's a mom, an entrepreneur, but awesome attitude. And you want to talk about, online trolls are everywhere, right? And especially when you are a attractive woman and you're really good at a sport, like trolls come out of the woodworks on everything. And her conversations of like how she just completely ignores and shuts down what most people can't stop paying attention to is absolutely fascinating. And then the last I'll throw him your way, because you and I were actually just chatting about him offline, is Brian Johnson, right? He recently, we chatted with him. Great book. I see it on your shelf right behind you as well. But Brian, it's funny. Brian is a guy that has been, I would say for me, he's been behind the scenes of a lot of the people that I know and that I follow, like Kaner and those folks who Brian's had an impact on. almost as the Yoda behind the curtain that we haven't seen working with these folks. And so he's someone that I highly recommend just from the quality of content they're putting out there at Arete.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And when you talk about behind the scenes, the idea of iron sharpens iron, I have become a good friend, as you have, with Brian Kane. We've both gone through his programs. But Brian Kane, similar to you, has done introductions and things, and he introduced me to Sean Casey, who I've been fortunate to say is now a friend. And even before I knew, to your point, who the Yoda was behind, I saw within the same week Sean Casey talking about the book and Brian Kane talking about the book. So even if I didn't want to, I didn't think about it, I was like, the fact that those two guys were behind it, I was like, this is something that I have to read.
I was about to say, I'm going to say that same thing for me because I got pitched by his team, right? His new book just came out. They launched the app. His team pitched me, just like you. You get podcast pitches all the time. And I'm like, who's this guy? Like, I look up, I see Kaner. And I was like, oh, if Kaner's connected to this, Kaner's put like, this is good folks. So like, I'm in. Let me learn. Let me connect. So to that point, like, iron sharpens iron, being intentional with who you follow, because who they promote, who they talk about is just as important as for those of us in those platforms, being intentional about who we introduce to others, knowing reputations and the care, right? The most important thing we have is right now these listeners' time. And so what are we doing to add value to them?
I love that. Speaking of adding value, I know for a fact our listeners want to connect and follow you. So what's the best way for them to do so? Best way for them to get your new book, but also I highly recommend your first book as well. And then what's the best way for them to potentially hire you if they're a company or organization is looking to bring on a phenomenal speaker?
Dude, appreciate it. Easiest place from a web standpoint is competeeveryday.com. You'll have links to the books, podcasts, speaking engagements, which will direct you over to my site. For social, I'm really only active on two platforms, Instagram and LinkedIn, and both of my usernames on them is Jake Thompson Speaks. So drop me a note. Anything we talk about here, you want to continue to jam on, shoot me a DM. Would love to. I'm sure we'll have some Jordan Kobe arguments pop into the DMs that we can talk about, but would love to connect with anyone in any arena that we can do to support and encourage you.
And then last question we have for you is the same question I asked you last time, is if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
Chase excellence over ego. Ego is a vain pursuit that's going to leave you constantly grasping at straws and keeping up with the Joneses, which you never win. Chasing excellence is the one thing that's going to help you get closest to your full potential and make the biggest impact on others, which is, I know, what the Positivity Tribe's all about.
I appreciate you. For those of you that are not following Jake, make sure you do so. As I said before, a company, organization, you are looking to bring a phenomenal speaker, definitely reach out to Jake and grab both his new book and his old book. And I want to just say thank you for being on here again. And I know that we will connect again soon.
Dude, appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to episode number 438. Jake delivered a ton of value today, and I hope you take action with some of the things he shared. He is definitely a CEO, a Chief Encouragement Officer. In his parting words, Jake encouraged us to chase excellence over ego. As we conclude today's episode, I would like to encourage you, our listeners, to go for your excellence. I believe everyone has greatness within them, but it won't come out on its own. Take action today and make sure you compete. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.